David Coon, the leader of the Green Party and MLA for Fredericton South. This is a little bit like Back to the Future for me, because I began my career in 1985 at the Conservation Council, and my first assignment there was to organize a campaign to build public support for legal protection of our water, of our fresh water around the province. And ultimately, with lots of other people involved, led to the enactment of the Clean Water Act in 1989. A 50-page piece of legislation with 9 regulations, which combined with some provisions of the Clean Environment Act represent our current approach to protecting water, to providing clean water. That's what we've got. And it's been world-leading in many ways. When the disaster happened in Walkerton in Ontario some years ago, the Ontario government looked at New Brunswick's Clean Water Act and its regulations for guidance and ideas and inspiration to how to ensure that they could avoid another Walkerton from ever happening at that province again. So we've been out front on water, on protecting water. There appears to be in the discussion paper no particular rationale as to why now there is a need to develop some new water strategy beyond what we've got represented within the Clean Water Act and its regulations, which over time has, we've seen some problems with things like the regulations governing wetlands, where a previous government backed away from that and under Margaret Ann Blaney designated, essentially disappeared half the wetlands so that they no longer fell under the regulation governing their protection. Similarly, we never saw the coastal lands protection regulations instituted, which should have been the case. And as Mr. Eyre mentioned, the water classification regulation beyond lakes has never been implemented to govern the water quality of our rivers and streams. So it's had its hiccups. But here we are today. Suddenly, apparently, we need a new approach with no reasonable explanation as to why. The Clean Water Act came in 1989. I think it might be appropriate if there's an interest in water, and interestingly enough, the Minister of Environment's mandate letter contained no direction as to what his mandate should be with respect to the environmental part of his portfolio, only regarding local government. There was nothing in there particularly about water. So this has emerged more recently. The current process is entirely inappropriate, rushed, as has already been described, and is in fact going to result in the production of another report called What We Heard or What Was Said, as we saw under the strategic program review process. This is no way to rebuild public trust in our public institutions, which we know is a huge problem. In fact, I met with the Premier before Christmas on that very point about public trust in the biggest public institution in the province, the most central one, and that's the Legislative Assembly, the legislative branch of government, with some recommendations as to how we move forward. With respect to water, one of the things that I believe we could do is the Premier could establish a select committee on water, all parties, with responsibility to hold public hearings, to hear from the public, to hear from experts, to hear from scientists, to hear from industry, what are their concerns about water, to get it out in the open. So we have an open and transparent discussion about the state of how we protect our water, our fresh water today in New Brunswick, and that select committee would be charged with making a report recommendations to the Legislative Assembly. That's really how things should be working in New Brunswick. Politics is about how we make decisions about important things involving the people of this province. And committees are the way our Legislative Assembly does that. That's where, in between elections, citizens should be engaging regularly on important matters like the protection of our water with those that were elected to represent them. And how are we to represent citizens of this province if we don't have formal means of interacting in a meaningful way, like a select committee on such an important topic as the future of the way we protect our water? It makes me nervous indeed that in the discussion paper there's a suggestion that what needs to happen is to establish a balance between human needs, the needs of the rest of nature, and the economy for water. This is 2016. It's all about the economy and the environment now, not the economy or the environment. I don't know if the Premier's not been paying attention to the new Prime Minister, but that's what he seems to be all about in his public statements. So it's time we get with the program here. And if there is a need to review the Clean Water Act, let's do it. Let's do it with a select committee of the legislature. The Premier seems to be allergic these days to the legislature. We're currently adjourned. We stood adjourned for 6 weeks. We've had our sitting days cut in half. We haven't had a standing committee meeting other than estimates since last year. The government has refused to provide members to attend standing committee meetings, like for public accounts and crown corporations. You know, my colleague Peter Bevan Baker in Prince Edward Island, who was elected in the last provincial election there and is the leader of the Green Party on the island, since January has participated in 17 meetings of standing committees, different standing committees, and 7 meetings of a select committee on democratic and legislative reform in that province. That's Prince Edward Island. You know, in Prince Edward Island, you can go to their Legislative Assembly website and you can click on Committee, I would like to appear before the committee and make a presentation, and weekly it changes on their website and tells you, here you can read what happened at this committee, here you can hear the recording of what happened at that committee. Incredible. Far more democratic than what we've got right now. So we need to inject some democracy into this discussion. We need to hear what the rationale is. We need to start having some truthfulness about, finally, what is the problem? What is the problem this government and previous governments have run into with implementing water classification? We need to hear that. And I think a select committee of all parties sitting on that committee to hear from New Brunswickers, to hear from experts, to hear from the scientific community, to hear from business, is the way to go. Thanks very much.
So I guess we'll take some questions from the media. Anybody?
I was